Hi everyone, welcome to the Old Vic. Hi, my name is Jessica Norman and I run Voices Off, which is the series of talks, conversations and debates which this afternoon's talk is part of. I'm so pleased to be introducing the panel this afternoon. Inspired by our production of A Christmas Carol, we're going to be exploring the science of generosity and asking whether giving really is good for us. Before we get started, I wanted to thank Mishkondareya, who we're very proud to be working with on a number of talks in our Voices Off series. As a registered charity with no government subsidy, the Old Vic aims to raise £3.6 million each year, and the support we receive from Mishkon enables us to broaden our work and engage with audiences in new and exciting ways. We're live streaming today on Facebook Live, so please turn your phones on silent, but feel free to tweet and interact with us on Facebook and Twitter at Old Vic Theatre using our hashtag VoicesOff. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our panel, Giles Fraser, Oliver Scott Curry, Michael Muthukrishna, Nichola Raihani, and the executive partner for Mishkondareya, James Libson. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessica. It's a terrific pleasure to be here. It's such an honour to walk onto this stage where I've seen so many productions and sit here. It's spine-tingling, exciting. So I hope our debate's going to live up to that. My name's James Libson. As Jessica said, I'm the executive partner of Mishkondareya, and I just wanted to say how honoured we are to have this partnership with the Old Vic. It gives us great pleasure. It really enriches the life of our lawyers, and I hope we can stimulate some interesting debates, and this will be one of them. So we're going to start off by having our distinguished panel introduce themselves. We'll go from my immediate left, and each person is going to introduce themselves and their thoughts on the topic for just about a minute, and then we'll have a discussion up here and then open it up to the floor for questions. So, Nichola.
Okay, thanks. So my name's Nichola Raihani, and I am a professor of evolution and behaviour at UCL. And I've worked on lots and lots of different species, from little birds called pied babblers who live in the Kalahari Desert, to mole rats, who are arguably the most ugly mammal that you'll ever see. Costly actions have to ultimately be repaid if they're going to persist. And what I'm interested in is how these costly helping behaviours are ultimately repaid, and how we can then understand helping behaviour from an evolutionary perspective.
My name is Michael Muthukrishna. I'm an assistant professor of economic psychology at the London School of Economics and a research associate in human evolutionary biology at Harvard. One of the puzzles that I'm interested in is what we call the expanding moral circle. Why it is that the us and us and them seems to be getting larger and larger. So, I mean, when you look at the news these days, it might not seem this way, but actually we live in one of the safest, most prosperous times in history. And we went from, the only us being our family, our kin, to the only us being our tribe, to our region, to our country, and for some people, all of humanity and some non-human animals. We don't want to hurt them or eat them. So I'm interested in, how that happened for some practical reasons, like why is the EU failing, and also to ensure that our grandkids are, that trend continues for them.
Okay, my name's Oliver Scott Curry, and I'm a recovering philosopher. I now conduct psychology experiments in the anthropology department in Oxford. And I'm basically interested in why people do nice things, why they're kind, why they're generous. It used to be, as Nichola was saying, it used to be the case that evolutionary biology struggled to explain cooperation and altruism and general niceness. But now it's almost the opposite is the case. We've got an embarrassment of riches. We've got lots of theories for why different organisms do nice things, and they apply to humans just as much as any other social animal. And the basic reason why humans are nice is that we're social animals. We've lived in social groups for about 50 million years, and during that time, other people have been our life support system. We've relied on them to survive and thrive, and those supportive networks were a matter of life and death. Keeping them going was one of the most important things we could do. And as a result, evolution has equipped us with a range of social, cooperative, and altruistic dispositions. And these theories can explain why we're kind to family and friends and teammates and neighbours, and also to strangers. Strangers are just people you have, friends you haven't met yet. So being kind to people you don't know could be the start of a beautiful friendship. It could boost your reputation for being a good guy or a hero. or it could be a lucky accident, a byproduct of some of those other dispositions. So we have a range of ways of explaining why people do nice things, and the real tricky bit is trying to figure out which one applies in any given case and how we can tickle those dispositions to get a bit more niceness. Thanks.
My name's Giles Fraser. I'm a priest around the corner here. I'm a journalist, and I used to teach philosophy in Oxford for a few years. And I come at things from a different perspective than the distinguished panel here. I've never been very interested in science, and I've never been very interested in the sort of explanations that science can offer. And I'm also slightly wary and suspicious. I'm wary and suspicious that the question that's being asked is that generosity is itself a puzzle that needs to be explained. It's very interesting that we have that's the sort of background assumption. I'm also nervous that the answer will always be a form of enlightened self-interest. And I'm nervous of that because it seems to be ultimately too easily purloined as a justification for self-interest. And I think one of the things about generosity that I would want to defend is that, that there is such a thing as acting not in your own interest. Now, it may well be that our distinguished colleagues are not saying anything that I've ascribed to them, but I want to defend something that I would want to call something like real generosity. Just also want to say that the reason I'm here, actually, is because I wanted a couple of tickets to this extraordinary performance tonight, and this is why I'm getting it. And the reason I wanted a couple of tickets is because, you know, if anyone knows about generosity, it's Charles Dickens. The Christmas Carol is one of the great parables of the 19th century about the way in which goodness opens people up. So I won't understand a lot of what my colleagues are going to say here today, but I look forward to being enlightened.
Thank you. Thank you for those introductions. So, something that's quite surprising to me, listening to the four of you, is an assumption, I think, that humans are nice and generous, and that we tend towards niceness and generosity, because I'm not sure that that's an assumption that prevails in our general discourse, so that people, if you ask that question, and in my reading around for tonight, I saw a argument between, as it were, the selfish gene school of thought and hardwired altruism. And I just want to probe your optimism in relation to humanity. Maybe, Oliver, I think you said why humans are nice, so maybe we'll start with you.
Okay, well, it's certainly not the case. The argument isn't that everyone's good all the time, or even most people are good most of the time. I think what you would expect. The point is, if you let's start from a world where no one's nice at all, or no organisms are nice at all. The point is that there's now explanations to say why we get more than zero niceness, why we get some at all. Exactly how nice people are, how better than nothing they are, is an empirical question. I think niceness is normally distributed. Most people are pretty good in the middle. You get some extremes at both ends. You get saints at one end and sinners at the other. But most people are okay most of the time. But the point is, however much niceness there is, we have ways of explaining it.
Nichola?
I mean, I totally agree with Oliver, but I think also to speak to your question directly, the evolutionary perspective doesn't predict indiscriminate generosity. And in fact, we know that isn't how people behave. So what we tend to see much more is people being very nice to people who are defined as being in their in-group. So like people in your immediate social network who are of value or who you have established relationships with are typically much more likely to be the beneficiaries of your generosity than people that you don't know or people that you haven't met. And sometimes when you have competition between groups, people can be actually really horrible to each other, like we all can see that in everyday life. So I don't think no one would ever say that we're expecting indiscriminate and unbridled generosity to emerge, but it should be context-specific. That's what we would predict, and that is actually what we see.
So would you say that the trend the historic trend, the evolutionary trend, is to a more generous society, if that's the if those are the impulses.
So I think that's like it's a really interesting question. I think one of the things that's different about the society that we live in now that maybe wasn't true, even 50 years ago or 100 years ago, is that the things people do nowadays, the nice things you do and the not so nice things you do, can be very easily found out about by a lot of people, through social media and networks and things like that. So I think now, in some respects, there's increasing incentives for people to manage their reputations and behave in a way that makes them look good. So I think potentially that could be important, but we're really at the beginning of even being able to measure those things at the moment.
So I think two people have mentioned about looking good in giving, and I want to know, hear a little bit about that, and what are the impulses to giving, and whether it's about looking good or feeling good. Michael, perhaps you want to...
Yeah, sure. So I might talk a little bit about those mechanisms that Oliver alluded to. So, we understand from biology why it is that we love our families and we cooperate with our kin. Any genes that can identify copies of themselves will be and favor those copies will spread. But that only kind of gets you to the level of family. If you want to go a little bit further, we have what we call direct reciprocity. So if I interact with my office mates and I'm going to do so on a regular basis, I'm going to be nice to them because they know where I am, they know who I am. And even in a village, you can imagine, I know exactly who you are. You're not going to be bad to me because I'm going to come find you, right? And you can get a little bit further via reputation. So I don't know who you are, you don't know who I am, but I know of you, I know your parents, and I'm going to tell everyone what you did to me, and now no one's going to want to cooperate with you. And that's really not the kind of cooperation that we see in the world today, where, I'm sitting in front of an audience of people that I've never met. There's no way that a chimp would achieve this. And in many earlier stages, in the distant past, you would never do this. This would be a very dangerous situation to be in. So today we have these kind of institutions that do this kind of punishment for us, right? They protect us. We have the old Vic. I'm sure we have some security guards around. We have the government, police forces, and so on. So one of the puzzles is how we made the leap, in my mind, the leap from this reputational-based system to this kind of institutional punishment system. And one suggestion is religion, actually, and I can break that down. But the other side of it is that these other scales of cooperation are still with us today, and they can actually undermine institutions, and we call that corruption. So, favoring your family at the expense of the state, that's nepotism. Favoring your friends at the expense of, the meritocracy, that's cronyism, and so on.
So just turning to the issue of what makes people happy in the giving. Is it the reputational enhancement it gives, or is it the act of giving itself? Giles?
So the premise here is miles away from where I would begin, because the assumption is always here that what is good, what is morally good, is always to be associated with some particular sort of advantage that one might gain, and that's a sort of built into the assumption of my colleagues here. Now, that I have a problem with this, from the very beginning, because, in a way, morality becomes reduced to something like teamwork or some sort of extended form of teamwork, which is fine. And I think that explains why the language morality used here is actually pretty thin. Words like nice and we're being nice to each other, or, these are not particularly rich or interesting moral words. They're quite sort of thin moral words. And this may well be because we start from somewhere very different, but that's my challenge is, I suppose, to this sort of community, and that's and I can't talk from a scientific point of view. My challenge is from somebody who works in morality and ethics quite a lot, to develop a sort of richer vocabulary, richer moral vocabulary that doesn't just seem to sound a little bit like teamwork or, that we're always, there's always some advantage being played out here. In answer to your first question, I differ again from the others here, is that I have a very dark view of human nature, much darker view of human nature. I think we're all shits, basically. Well, I am, but I'm speaking. I mean, I think others are too. But I certainly am as well. And I think that there's a sort of naivety about. I mean, you know, Plato has this famous story about if you could wear an invisibility cloak, how would you actually behave if there were no consequences whatsoever to your behaviour? Would you be groping people on the tube? Would you be taking their wallets? Would you be how moral would you be if there were absolutely no consequences and so forth? And my view on that is I think most of us would fail that test really very badly. So I start with a much darker view of human nature, and as does, of course, Christianity.
We actually all agree. Like, none of us would disagree with that. Like, loads and loads of studies have shown that people are more cooperative when they're observed. They're more likely to donate to charity. They're more likely to help other people. So none of us would disagree, I don't think, with that.
So does that, you disagree?
Well, yeah, I mean, if we'd evolved in a world where we were always invisible, then we wouldn't be living in the cooperative world we do now. We didn't evolve in that world, and so we're hardwired to err on the side of cooperation, to err on the side of being kind. And so, of course, if people are anonymous, they're less good than they would be otherwise. But it doesn't go to zero; they don't become psychopaths.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's partly the morality and the morality of religion and the history of religion and religion's attitude to charity, because certainly in the three principal monotheistic religions, zakat, tzedakah in Judaism, zakat in Islam, and caritas in Christianity, it's about obligation, I think, rather than about this state where we get in, where it naturally, where generosity naturally happens. Is that part of the thing?
I would agree, but I'd flip it on its head. I mean, I think those religions are that way because they've been able to expand having those traits. So there may be, you can imagine, like a landscape of all kinds of religions preaching all kinds of different things. And the ones that have generosity and are able to kind of inculcate those norms into their followers will expand at the expense of those that, don't have those. It's an example why most religions are pro-fertility, right? Mm-hmm. Because it allows them to expand. All the religions that said don't breed, they're not with us today.
Maybe they were the best ones. Maybe they were the best ones.
Maybe they were, but they're not here. And I mean, this is the central puzzle, right? Like, so in biology, an important distinction is between kind of these ultimate level and proximate level explanations. So, at this proximate level, being nice makes us feel good, right? But we could have felt good about being horrible. We could have felt good about a whole variety of different things. So you need this kind of ultimate level explanation. So if I say, why do people enjoy sex? Approximate explanation is, well, sex is pleasurable. People like pleasurable things. And maybe you can dig in, a little deeper.
But isn't this is an explanation, an interesting explanation, a very good explanation of why certain sorts of positions prosper and other sort of positions don't. I understand that.
Yeah.
But why is this an explanation for the ones that prosper are somehow morally preferable? I mean, what happens if there's a morally preferable? I will describe to you a morally preferable group that'll end up destroying themselves in 10 years' time. Now, they may be morally preferable.
Yeah.
I agree they won't survive, but that's how it is.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that most things that are morally preferable are the things that have expanded and that have allowed us to expand. It's kind of a flipped on its head. It's the only reason you think it's moral is because it's a way to ensure that those norms persist.
So morality is just a survival strategy.
It's not intrinsic. There's no intrinsic goodness in generosity.
I don't want to make any statements about
bargaining, precedent, a whole range of different cooperative non-zero-sum strategies, and that generates explanations of, as you were saying, a whole.
The claim in just an enlightened and clever sort of way, fails to recognise the deep selflessness that people can exhibit, and it feels like there's a disconnect between this language and what can be exhibited.
Nichola, do you want to go back on that?
So this is basically like the critique that I get a lot, which is you're taking the altruism out of altruism, which is not really that's not what we're doing, but I can see how the confusion arises. So essentially, like what Michael said, when you think about behaviours from an evolutionary point of view, there are multiple levels of explanation. So if you think about, just to get away from morality entirely, if you, for example, were on safari and you saw a lioness and she was chasing a gazelle and you thought, why is she doing that? So we're saying why, like we're asking a why question here. You can ask why questions about lots of different behaviours. So in this case, why is a lioness chasing a gazelle? One proximate...
She's hungry,
one reason is she's hungry. So that's, in a way, that's analogous to your... This is pure altruism. I'm doing this because this is the reason I'm doing it, and there's no other hidden agenda. I'm just hungry, and that's all there is to it. The evolutionary reason why a lioness is chasing a gazelle is actually because, on average, lionesses that do that and don't just sit under a tree and never do anything tend to have more offspring and tend to do better in life than the ones who don't chase gazelles, right? So there's two explanations. They don't replace each other.
Yes,
They're both valid, and it's not really taking the altruism out of altruism in that sense.
I completely agree with you, and I think that's how I would see it as well. The question then becomes, of these different sorts of explanations, which of those explanations is the moral explanation, as it were? So there might be an explanation about human behaviour. So this is an explanation about human behaviour, and I completely understand that. But does that, by reducing it, and I do think there's a form of reductionism here, by reducing it to human advantage, it seems to me that you're not respecting the language of morality in which the question is framed.
I'm just going to get Oliver answer or make a comment on that, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience.
I think it's perfectly possible to have a deep respect for a person's behaviour and also understand and explain it. The two are not mutually contradictory. So you could. So what's the problem?
I agree. Well, then you didn't understand what I just said. I said there are different orders of explanation, and there are different orders of explaining the same thing. And some of them are moral explanations, and some of them are non-moral explanations. And you can explain a moral phenomena in a non-moral way. That's a perfectly acceptable thing to do, but I just don't call it morality.
Well, I'd say that the vast majority of moral philosophers, or certainly a very strong tradition in moral philosophy and work that's in contemporary work, identifies morality as mutually beneficial interactions, as cooperative interactions. Whether you're talking about Plato or Hobbes or Hume or Rawls or
how convenient! You've defined the very.
Well,
if
you survey the literature, you find it's a very common way of looking at morality, and I think it's actually. I get anxious when people contrast or make out that the only options are either sort of egoism or abject self-sacrifice, because then it makes the prospect of doing the right thing look extremely onerous. People go, oh God, that's far too much, and they revert back to being selfish. In fact, there's this whole swathe of behaviours in the middle, which are more or less costly, but are win-wins. And instead of always trying to sacrifice ourselves on the altar of ultimate altruism, we should be looking for all of these opportunities in the middle, just to make other people's lives a little bit better.
That is, of course, true.
Thank you. Let me turn to the audience. Who wants to start? Lady at the back there.
In the case of a soldier sacrificing himself in the battlefield, isn't there though still a selfish reason where, if it's a religious reason, he is doing that for the favour of God? Or
I don't think anybody does that for the favour of God.
If it's a pure sort of nationalistic reason, then he's still doing it for the
I think he's doing it to.
favour of his clan.
I mean, I think generally speaking, I mean, I used
I'm just going to repeat the question because there are no microphones in the audience. So the question is, if a soldier sacrificing himself in the battlefield, is that still ultimately a selfish action? Because there is another reason, not just self-sacrifice.
I mean, two things I'd say about what you've just said. You've actually made my criticism of the position. You just basically said, all actions are basically selfish actions, which is what I'm, and so that's my anxiety. You've voiced my anxiety with the position that I'm hearing here. Secondly, actually, I used to teach people who taking up command responsibility in Iraq up at the Defence Academy in Shrivenham. And one thing you learn is why people fight, and why they sacrifice. They sacrifice for their mates. They don't die for country. They very rarely believe all that bullshit. They don't die for God. Okay, if someone falls on a hand grenade to stop this lot, generally speaking, they do it for their mates. Now, you can cast that in any way you like, but for me, that sort of action is what I call heroism.
Thank you. Lady in the front.
Play into exactly what the other three have just been saying, though, like I think that we do things for the benefit of our closest people.
Yes, we do things for the benefit of our closest people.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't agree with that. Don't disagree with that. No, of course.
So no, but the question means that if that's the case, then from what you said before, you wouldn't count that soldier's action as moral.
No, it's perfectly moral. I don't have any problem with that being moral.
Even though you can explain it in the same way we would.
No, I'm saying you can explain it in non-moral ways. That's absolutely fine. You can explain all sorts of things in non-moral ways. What I'm in, but there are moral explanations of it, and there are non-moral explanations.
What would be a moral explanation of it? Sorry.
That he was being selfless and it was good.
But do you think in the moment that he was, I don't know anything about war, by the way, doing whatever...
Yes.
Do you think that he was thinking, or she actually, was thinking about...
Why does what he was thinking matter?
Well, if it's if it was done for a moral purpose.
You think the brain has an important role in morality?
Well, it sounds like you think intentions are important.
I'm not sure. I'm not even sure I do, actually. I haven't said that yet.
But your moral explanation isn't really an explanation, it's just restating the thing you want
That's true.
to explain.
That's absolutely true. So that's absolutely true. So I'm also resistant to the idea of explanations about this too. Okay. So that's part of my reductionism here. My fear of explanations is that you explain one thing in terms of something other than itself, and that's part of the anxiety.
So I'm interested in the bit that hasn't been answered, which is about thinking, whether thinking is part of the act, because you questioned whether thinking was important in adjudicating between the morality or not of the act in question.
Yeah, I don't have a strong sense that that moral behaviour begins somehow in thinking something and then it issues in action. I just don't have that model in my head.
But you could do something amazing with a really terrible intention. So, like, you could think, oh, I'm going to run away as fast as I can, but you happen to trip over the grenade and then save all your friends. But, but that then would be moral or not?
Why would that be moral?
No, but that's what you said. Is like if because if the intention doesn't matter, then doing as long as it has a good outcome, then that's moral.
No, I'm not. No. I didn't even say that either. I didn't even say I'm certainly not a utilitarian on these issues. So, there's something about wanting to take a moral action and pull it apart into non-moral bits. Okay, the assumption that it's comprised of non-moral bits, that you put it together. I mean, not only do I have an anxiety about, is and oughts, okay, and that's a very big discussion we can have about the relationship between, is statements and ought statements. But I have the idea that there's a form of reductionism that goes on here, where actually, in the end, the component parts of a moral action end up being things that don't add up to anything that looks like morality for me. That's my anxiety.
Can I voice a parallel concern that's along the same lines? That in explaining this, as we do, we actually undermine the act. So, I'm at the LSE. I can tell you economists and economics students start off acting like humans, and by the end of their first year, they act like economists in these games. They take the selfish option. And they do that because they realize that actually, the kind of moral norms that we've all internalized are not always in your self-interest. And when the magic is kind of removed, you're like, wait, I should totally be cheating a little bit on my tax.
And the society that I'm in, but I also know what I feel is moral or immoral, and that's not because somebody's told me that's to do with how I see it. So inevitably in these kinds of conversations, you will feel like, oh, well, that doesn't quite hit it for me because it's such a personal thing.
I mean, you're going to pick a completely different sort of fight with me over this, and it will take us in a completely different direction. No, well, I might pick fight back, but I disagree with almost everything you said. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's about how you feel.
I don't think it's subjective.
I certainly don't think it's subjective.
But if it isn't subjective, then who controls what it is?
Controls.
Who sets
Well,
what
so I
morality
don't
is?
like the
It's
model
not
of...
a
So
subjective thing.
the problem it's so complicated is you're assuming a model of subjectivity and objectivity that is something that that sort of... One is just sort of airy-fairy feelings...
You don't want any labels on it at all, I think.
What?
You don't want any labels on it in any way, I think it's kind of what you're saying.
No, this is a slightly different... This is a different question. I'm now talking about subjectivity and objectivity. Okay, and I think it's a really complicated business, that is.
I think you're at least half right. In that it is subjective, but as humans we will have similar subjectives.
So intersubjective.
Yeah. And we all have, like any bit of our psychology, there's normal variation, like I was saying. If we're talking about our eyesight or our taste buds or anything else, there's variation. But what we tend to see is variation on a theme. So things like it's good to look after your family, it's good to return favours, it's good to be heroic. We find these universally as moral principles cross-culturally all around the world, irrespective of religion or any other variable. But different people in different societies differ in how they rank them or what weight they attach.
And who they're directed at.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Lady in the second row there.
Nichola described having identified altruism in a variety of animals, I think all vertebrates. I wondered whether any altruistic behaviour had been observed in invertebrates.
Very interesting.
And if so, what level of brain development, cognitive function seemed to be required before altruism was observed?
I don't know if everyone heard that question, but it was a question about whether altruism had been detected in invertebrate animals, and if so, what level of cognitive function within the brain had been observed.
And indeed invertebrates in the whole animal.
Moral bacteria, even.
Yeah, why not?
So,
What level of complexity of the nervous system and brain development and what level of cognitive function seems to be necessary and sufficient for
the desert in South America, where every single night one worker of that ant species will wait for everybody to go into the colony, and it waits and waits and waits and waits, and then when they've all gone in, it rolls a bit of sand over the top, and in doing so, it seals its own fate to die outside in the cold. So, and every night there's one of the new workers like, me tonight, guys. So, so ants have amazing, like, you know, there's amazing examples of altruism in nature, not just in humans. Darwin found this so troubling, like when he found these ants that didn't reproduce, that sacrificed their reproductive success. When he wrote about those, he said, these queens are fatal to these insects, that don't breed, are in fact fatal to my whole theory. They don't fit in with my theory of evolution by natural selection. And he was troubled by this, you know, that this was such a challenge for him to explain. What we now know is that evolution can favour those types of extreme altruism via what we call kin-selected benefits, whereby if you're all closely related enough, then it can actually be in your genes' best interest to help the genes that are not in your body but that are in the bodies of your close relatives. And to just answer your last bit of your question, whether it relies on complex cognition, no. I mean, in many of the social insects, your role in life is determined by the food that you get fed as a larvae, and you will then develop into either, you'll get the role of the one that rolls the sand over and stay out in the cold, or maybe if you're very lucky you become the queen, but that's really, not many get to be the queen.
Gentleman in the second row.
Yeah. From all the research, the anthropological research and the socioeconomic research, we can see that doing selfless acts and altruistic acts are good for the community, good for building the community, and that goes on in our society, obviously. But I think it's becoming clearer that morality is completely independent of religion. So, for example, we don't need a Christian festival to have religion, or
So I do actually say what I think, yes. And if me saying what I think about what is right and wrong constitutes imposing, okay, then I think you need to get a bit more. Yes, I mean, I think it is the case. I put no store there by this, by the way, but I think it is the case that the analysis of who gives is that certain religious groups are particularly generous. So I think there is but I put no store by that. I don't think it has anything to do with religion per se, by the way. I think there'll be another sort of explanation for that, and it wouldn't bother me if that was not true. So,
I think it is true, and it's also not true that morality and religion are kind of separable from each other. One of the themes throughout this whole thing is that what this morality is all about is kind of different scales of cooperation, right? So, like, you're right. You're talking about the fact that today we cooperate at a global scale. We care about people so far away from us, and what part did religion have to play in this? Earlier I mentioned these kind of different mechanisms. You get to reputation, it gets you so far, it doesn't necessarily get you to this later stage until you get kind of institutions. What religion might have done is serve as this gap between this. So religion, people often think about it as one of the great sources of conflict, but it's also a great source of cooperation, right? It's a super ethnic category. You can have people from different ethnicities together under this one religious banner. And then maybe, once you get the institutions in place, you can kind of kick that off. And now we've all internalized these ideas, for example, right? But you do, from this kind of, the big selective puzzle is that if you discover people are always doing different things, as a lady over here mentioned, it's this very subjective thing. And so if you discover that you can get away with being a little bit more selfish, over time, if there isn't some kind of mechanism to prevent that, you slip backwards. You're constantly at risk of slipping backwards. And so you need something to kind of keep this expanding. Because humans are humans and have been for a long time, and we didn't always give to people so far away. We colonized them before, or we enslaved them, or whatever.
I'm going to stop you because there are other people desperate to, other people keen to ask questions in the front row. Yes, sorry, I'm keen. I did correct myself.
You don't look very desperate.
Keen.
I wanted to bring up some points. One is that I think the fact that we're nurtured for so long and that we can't cope independently until we're grown up, and some of us don't seem to cope very well, even after. But that actually teaches us to be caring, whether we pick it up from our parents or not. Secondly, I think it's really interesting, this notion that we're good to our families. I think there may be many people in this room who actually dislike certain members of their family very intensely and actually carry grudges through life. So I don't think you can generalise. And as somebody who runs a charity, I find it really interesting that people like a simple message to help people far away. Because once you talk about people who are near you, they're homeless because they're not working hard enough, they're shiftless. People find it much harder. And I also want to just mention that the Jewish idea of charity is actually split into, and it's tzedakah, which is justice. We've landed somewhere quite good because we don't suffer the consequences of many people who live in other places. And I think that's a very important thing. And the one thing that you're supposed to be talking about, science of generosity, and you've not mentioned, is the fact that we know that people's brains liberate positive chemicals when they're feeling generous. So it makes you feel better. It's good for you to give.
Okay, so I'm going to turn that last comment into a question. Is that right? I'm asking this. I agree with you, but I'm asking our panel.
Yes, it is right. So there's lots of research showing that there's a correlation between helping and being happy. But more importantly, there's also quite a fair bit of experimental research looking at whether, if you assign people to do, for example, random acts of kindness to others, whether that improves their mood relative to doing something neutral or even helping yourself. And I work with a charity called kindness.org, and we did a big review of this literature. We found that indeed there was a boost. Helping other people does make you happy. It's not enormous, it's not life-changing, it's not radical, but it increases your happiness. If you spend the day doing a handful of nice things for other people, you'll increase your happiness by about 7%. Which is compared to doing nothing, or compared to help yourself. So it does give you a little boost, and in a sense you get two for the price of one, because by helping someone else, it makes them happy, and it makes you happy. So it's a good investment.
Thank God Dickens didn't listen to that. I mean, the play you're about to hear on this stage in a bit, you see the utter transformation of Scrooge from a man who's like...
It's fiction, after all.
Fine. and fiction tells truths, and fiction tells truths in a way that 7% really doesn't. I mean, what Dickens completely got is the possibility of transformation. And the idea that the Ghost of Christmas Future, or whatever, I've forgotten the play now, but it's coming, will come and say, I'll make you 7% happier, Scrooge, and that will change your life. It's just, well, actually, the play wouldn't happen. Well, now, you may just think, oh, it's all fiction and rubbish. There is a moral truth about transformation, which I think you've dismissed in 7%, which I think is quite shocking.
I think you're shocking. You don't understand the idea of an average. So on average, it improves people by 7%. But like I said, it's a variation. So some people it doesn't make any difference at all. In other people, it can have a very big effect. So people differ, and people write plays about the more extreme examples. But you shouldn't mistake that for being representative.
If I may, the other thing is, with generosity, the scale, I keep going back to the scale is what matters. Being nice to different people is going to make you differentially happy, whether they're in your in-group or whether they're not. And on your point about family, actually, one of the things that we actually need to, it seems like it's a good thing to love your family, but one of the things we need to do in order to kind of have this larger scale of cooperation is to suppress your tendency to favor your family. Because in societies where you favor your family and you prioritize that, those are societies that are most corrupt. That's where nepotism is at its highest, because that's literally what it is.
So I'm really sorry, we've come to the end of our time allotted. It's been an absolutely fantastic discussion and debate. I said up in the room earlier, I hope everyone's not going to agree with each other. I think I achieved that. I think our panel has really earned their tickets for this evening. They've been absolutely fascinating. I want to thank each of you for your contributions. I hear that tonight's play actually does lead for many members of the audience, not to create too high expectations, a transformative rather than a 7% experience. So I hope you'll all enjoy a transformational experience this evening, and thank you for being in the audience.